So welcome everyone. We are going to get started. My name is Farah and I'm one of the therapists here at the Lighthouse. I specialize and have a special passion for working with bereavement, grief, and trauma. And I also serve as the director of our mental health first aid program. And today's session is going to be really everything I wish I knew when I was younger about mental health. And we will be talking about what is mental health and how is it different from mental illness? What is the difference between a few tough days versus something more serious? You are going to learn how to differentiate between healthy sadness versus depression, healthy worry versus an anxiety disorder. So I want you to be thinking about how to discern some of these things in yourself or in friends or family members or even in your colleagues. You, of course, are not learning how to diagnose anyone, but just to recognize those signs that something a bit more serious may be going on here with myself or someone I care about. We'll also speak about how to care for yourself. What is essential emotional hygiene and what does it mean when people say you should take care of yourself? Okay, so I'll share my screen with you. All right, so we are a team of about 30 psychologists. We are an outpatient mental health clinic located in Jumeirah, and we're really on a mission to destigmatize mental health in the region. We work very closely with the community, and we are the only accredited providers of mental health first aid in the region. So mental health, I want you to take a moment to think about, did anyone in my family, community, school, in my friendships, is this something you've heard, the word mental health? I know for me, growing up in a Pakistani American household, we never said the words mental health. And in almost 97% of all of the trainings, workshops, client work I've done, both group and individually, it's very rare that I will meet someone from any part of the world, West, East, that says, we talked about emotions, we talked about mental health. Usually you will hear, we didn't talk about it, and mental health was something only crazy people had. Mental health was confused or distorted as something only mentally ill people have. Well, we know the truth is that every single person has mental health the same way every single person has physical health. Mental health is not the same thing as mental illness, and our mind is quite complex. There's as many neurotransmitters in your mind as there are observable galaxies in the universe, which is, it's billions. It's quite a complex organ, and our mental health is, it is interconnected with our physical health. They both impact one another so profoundly. Okay, so great mental health is not about being positive all of the time or optimistic. Happiness is a single state of mind. It's a single, emotion. We're not happy all the time. And there's no such thing as negative emotions. Emotions are neutral. Some of them are just uncomfortable to feel. Okay, so great mental health is about being able to identify and experience the full range of all of your emotions. And the same way our physical health fluctuates, our mental health does as well. So you can imagine your physical health, where some weeks you're feeling really fit, you're feeling really strong, you're sleeping well, you're eating well, you're working out, and your physical fitness is great. And other weeks or months, you can have poorer physical health. You're not working out, you're not sleeping right. Maybe you haven't been eating nutrient-dense meals and you have poor physical health, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you will go on to develop a physical illness, but you're more at risk if your health is poor. And the same is true with our mental health. So sometimes we can have great mental health where you are feeling feelings, you're being compassionate towards yourself, you are taking care of your physical body, you're feeling connected to the people in your life, you're feeling optimistic, you're feeling proud of yourself, you're feeling anchored and grounded in your values. Okay, so you have those would be some of the tenets of good mental health. And if you do get stressed, you bounce back pretty quickly, right? Now, poor mental health, you may be feeling most days exhausted, depleted, resentful, numb, empty. Maybe you're being really hard on yourself. Maybe you're completely ignoring what you're feeling and not addressing what may need to change to feel like yourself again, right? And you can have poor mental health. Now, not everyone who is hard on themselves and doesn't feel their feelings will go on to develop a mental illness like depression or an anxiety disorder, but it's higher risk, right? You're more at risk. And usually when you're in a space of poor mental health, if a risk factor comes along, like stressors in your life, like a pandemic or relationship struggle or a health issue comes up, it can transition us into something more serious. So the major sign that someone is struggling with a mental illness is you're going to see that most days began feeling like difficult days for at least 2 weeks. Now, 2 weeks is often a clinical indicator that therapists are looking for. However, we know that the new data from the last 3 years tells us people typically wait 7 years before they ever seek treatment for depression. That's a really long time to suffer without support. So you can imagine I'm saying 2 weeks most days, but typically people are struggling for a lot longer than 2 weeks. It can be several months, it can be several years where someone says, well, most days I just feel kind of blah or numb or angry. So what you're going to see is when someone is struggling, you're going to see their inner world is getting quite loud, difficult feelings are getting quite loud, or difficult thoughts or worries. And that is going to disrupt their life in one or several ways. Okay, so think of these 4 domains that we are usually thinking of. And one is the way you are feeling is interrupting your ability to function. So that means take care of errands, your home, daily tasks. You may hear this person say, gosh, like, I just haven't gotten around to doing anything, or, getting out of bed feels so exhausting, or my to-do list has just been stacking up for months, okay? So functioning may be interrupted. Their physical health may be interrupted, okay? And you may see that work performance is disrupted, or it may be relationships. That may be personal or it may be professional. And what I tend to find in the region, as so many individuals in the region are quite high performing and you're here because of work, and many people are supporting family members in the country, outside of the country, I find that when people are struggling with their mental health, work performance is like the very, very last thing to go. And sometimes it doesn't even get impacted, where you'll see it's impacting health, functioning, relationships, isolating oneself, and work performance may be the very last thing to go. I see that a lot. Okay, so this is what we mean by someone is struggling with something more serious. It's most days. It's interrupting your life in some way. How common are mental health problems? They are very common. If you think you do not know someone who is struggling, that only tells me that there may not be the safety or the fear of stigma to share that they are struggling, because we know that 1/4 of the people in your life are struggling, 1/4 of team members, 1/4 of the people in your friend and family circle, on your social media. That 1 in 4 number is actually pre-pandemic. So we know that it's a lot higher. Okay, we know mental illnesses have really skyrocketed. And I know when I say mental illness, that can be like, whoa, like mentally ill. That really means illnesses like depression or anxiety disorder or addiction. Those are the 3 most common types. Right? We also know this 1 in 4 number from WHO comes from English-speaking countries and Japan. So if we look at what may be happening in the region, and There's so much more stigma, and we look at the amount of trauma in many of the neighboring countries around us, and we can imagine it's most likely a lot higher than 1 in 4 people struggling. Mental illnesses do not care if you're a millionaire or you have 1,000 dirhams in your bank account right now. It impacts all of us equally. And we will often hear clients say, but why? I have a good job, I have a family, I have resources. I shouldn't be feeling this way, right? But resources do not make us immune to developing illness. It can happen to any of us. The same way an Olympic athlete is not immune to physical health issues. And the same is true with mental health concerns. It can impact any of us, okay? Every 40 seconds around the world, someone dies by suicide, and it does tend to be more men than women. We know that depression is the second most common illness of all illnesses worldwide, both physical and mental. It is very common and it is very disruptive for our lives. Okay, so this was a really fascinating study done. It's actually a little bit old now. They did it about, I want to say, 15 years ago. And what they were looking at was how disabling is it to live with certain physical health illnesses. And what they found was that living with mild depression is as disabling as living with epilepsy. Living with moderate depression is as disabling as living with severe asthma. Living with severe post-traumatic stress disorder is as disabling as living with severe chronic emphysema, and living with severe depression is as disabling as living with disseminated breast cancer. And by disseminated, we mean the cancer has advanced to other parts of your body. Severe schizophrenia, which is a type of psychotic disorder, and psychosis or psychotic disorders are very rare. Less than 1% of the population will experience a psychotic episode in a year. It is a rare condition. However, it is just as disabling as living with severe dementia. Okay. Now, when you may be saying, well, how do they measure this? Okay. So anytime a physician is measuring any type of disability, they're looking at to what degree does this illness interrupt your ability to work, function, just do things around your house, whatever our daily tasks are, shower, eat, errands. So your ability to work, function, and in your relationships. Those are the 3 things that they're looking at to rank disability. So you can imagine if one of your colleagues came up to you and said, I'm really struggling with my asthma this week, most of us would say, you know, do you need to reschedule? Do you need to take a day off? Have you checked in with the doctor? What can I do to support you? Now, imagine that same colleague, if he or she were so courageous to say, I'm really struggling to get out of bed today because of my depression. One is, it's very rare anyone says that. And if they do, rather than being empathic and supportive, we do more harm by saying things like, well, come on, at least you live in Dubai, or be thankful for what you have, or focus on the bright side. And we actually say things that we do well-intended harm. Okay? We tend to think that someone who's struggling, ourselves or someone else, will appear this way. Sometimes when we can't identify it with our eyes, we think that person must be okay. You may even be looking at your own life and be thinking, well, I don't look like that. I'm not like crying in the corner somewhere. I'm functioning, I'm taking care of myself, I'm getting things done. So it must mean I'm not struggling. And that is really not the case, because typically people who are struggling, especially in the region, they can be that leader in your life, that high-performing individual, the funny one, the beautiful one, the one who seems to have it all together, the strong one, right? Because the nature of our mental health is quite invisible. So I think of people like Martin Luther King, who's a famous American civil rights leader. He had 2 suicide attempts as a teenager and struggled with depression throughout his life. Princess Diana, an eating disorder and anxiety. And it's interesting, I watched a documentary many years ago, And it was on Mother Teresa speaking about a period of her time where she struggled with depression. Michael Phelps is the most decorated Olympic swimmer. He's talked about his struggle with debilitating anxiety and suicidal thoughts. And I'm sure you can think of many other people where you said, whoa, I didn't know that they were struggling. And in organizations, I often hear this is when someone suddenly resigns and you're like, wow, they seem to have it all together, right? Where we can judge things by how they appear. I want you to know that you can be struggling with anxiety and appear confident, be suicidal and turn up to work and, seem fine. You can have a panic attack, but be performing moments later. You can be struggling with depression, but be quite the jokester or the comedian. You can be the team player, but internally feel a sense of worthlessness. And you can be highly successful, but internally feel like an imposter or feel inadequate, because the nature of our mental health is quite invisible. Now, on the flip side, I also will be talking about, despite it being hidden, what are some of those signs we can notice in ourselves or in others that may indicate, I think I should check in or investigate this a bit deeper, right? I want you to know that the dream with mental health care is early intervention. And I always hope that this is also the goal of organizations, is if we can catch it sooner than later, then the health outcome is so much better. You're gonna bounce back quicker. You're going to need less appointments, possibly counseling, less time off, possibly. You're going to heal quicker if we can detect it sooner than later. And that is really the dream of physical health care as well. Okay? We know 2 in 3 people will never seek treatment. And the 2 most common barriers, not the only ones, will be stigma. So fear of what will people think, I'm not crazy, I'm not weak, I just need to keep going at it. Or a lack of information. Many people will say, I just didn't know that this was something serious. I didn't know that it was even worthy of exploring or getting support for, okay? So I wanna talk about risk factors, and then I'm going to zoom into just briefly the difference between sadness and depression, healthy sadness and depression, and healthy worry versus anxiety, and then emotional hygiene. So there are many things that put you at risk of having poor mental health. Imagine risk factors can be taxing for our mental health. They don't necessarily, with certainty mean you will become unwell, but there's more risk. The same way if you weren't sleeping, weren't drinking water, weren't washing your hands, not working out, then there's more risk that you may develop certain lifestyle illnesses like diabetes, or you may be more at risk of getting a cold or so on, right? And the same is true with certain mental health conditions. So risk factors will be if there's a family history of depression, anxiety, addiction. It does mean that you are more susceptible. Now, most of us, if we go back a generation, there hasn't been a diagnosis, but I encourage you to be curious about, does this exist within my family? If you're living with a chronic physical illness or disability, hormonal imbalances, thyroid imbalances, many side effects of medication can often be the root cause for why someone is not feeling well, often vitamin D deficiency as well. And you see a lot of a lot of acne medication that is prescribed can really create a lot of mood instability as well. So one of the first ports of call, if you or someone in your life is not feeling well, is to check in with the GP and just rule out any underlying medical reason for why you may not be feeling well, functioning well, not sleeping well, not feeling like yourself. Psychological risk factors will be if you are really hard on yourself, okay? If you are quite self-critical or shaming. And this is a little bit of a catch-22, because we can be hard on ourselves, right? Which is a risk factor. However, if you find that you are chronically shaming and critical towards yourself, that can also be a sign that you may be struggling with something more serious like depression or anxiety, right? So they kind of fuel each other. Another thing that is a risk factor will be comparing ourselves to others, which most of us are doing. And the biggest risk factor of poor mental health will be childhood trauma. So things like physical abuse, emotional neglect, sexual abuse, these are all examples of childhood trauma. Those are the ones that are a bit more obvious. However, there are also so many other types of childhood trauma that we call ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. And these are things like witnessing domestic abuse, bullying, harassment, experiencing a divorce, the death of a loved one, big moves, having a parent or loved one struggle with addiction, or if a parent has been incarcerated, living in an unsafe community, war, poverty. These are also all experiences of childhood trauma. Okay. Now, we know that the science tells us if you have 3 to 4 experiences of childhood trauma, you are 12 times more likely to experience depression or anxiety disorders into adulthood. And if you have 4 or more, you are also significantly more likely to experience addiction. Okay, so, and it's really fascinating. There was a physical health doctor who was trying to understand why a huge portion of his patients were developing lifestyle diseases, things like obesity, diabetes, cancer, stroke, heart disease. And he was like, what? He wanted to investigate further. Why is this happening in this cluster of individuals? And when he did thousands and thousands of surveys, he found that the root cause was actually childhood trauma. Okay, and this led to us understanding the impact on mental health as well, because really time does not heal all wounds. And oftentimes adults who are struggling, the source or the origins of that struggle can be buried within childhood, because it does impact our neural pathways. Okay, so that's a really big risk factor. Social risk factors: a pandemic, being an expat, loneliness, bullying, if you're experiencing racism, discrimination, if you have some type of minority identity, that can also be quite stressful. Relationship troubles, going through a divorce, big life transitions, even positive ones like marriage, having a child, a promotion. These are actually all high stress times. Moving country, moving house. And of course, a loss can be a devastating risk factor. Grief is not a clinical or mental illness, but it can be immensely traumatic and a stressor for our mental health. Lifestyle risk factors: if you're not eating well, right? So what we are putting in our body, it really impacts our mental health as well. If you're not sleeping, right? So sleep is the essential fuel for our mind and body. If you're not moving or exercising, if you're not resting, playing, having fun, our mind and bodies need that. Okay, so that is a risk factor. If you're excessively using social media or actually any substance or behavior to numb or avoid difficult feelings, that's a risk factor. Okay, now hypothetical Johnson could have a family history, be a perfectionist, be a expat, be lonely, and not sleeping well, and not go on to develop depression, right? But there's an immense amount of risk that's there. And if you're like, wow, I'm going through a lot of risk factors, I encourage you to take extra care of yourself. And I'm going to define what that means. And if you're going through a high risk time, I want you to think of 2 things. One is check in with a professional sooner than later, even if you feel good, because it can just create more emotional insight to what you're experiencing, and you can quickly build some tools. Now, if you have a team member or a loved one going through a lot of different risk, it can be best practice to proactively check in with that team member to say, you know, you've been going through a lot. Is there anything that we can do to support you? Make sure they have access and the knowledge to resources to get support if at any point they'd like to. Okay, so let's take a closer look at depression and anxiety. So when you think of depression, I want you to know that depression is not just feeling sad or empty or, you know, crying. It doesn't look like that. It can. However, it looks a little bit different for everyone. And the visual I usually have of depression is of Dementors. So if anyone likes Harry Potter, it's a little bit of a, you know, this image where they come near Harry Potter and it's like, they describe it like all joy has left the body, right? Where it feels like you'll never feel cheerful again, because when we are experiencing depression, it can really narrow our worldview. We can feel quite lost in that pain. Depression is not just a mindset, it is a biological, emotional, psychological illness. We do see decreased serotonin levels in the brain when depression is present. At most, it's feeling completely numb, empty, devoid, irritable, disengaged. It's not just feeling sad, okay? So let's look at some of those signs a bit closer. And remember, do not diagnose yourself. But if you're like, huh, I've been kind of feeling that way for a while, then check in with a professional so they can investigate this together. But it is a flat or empty mood that is there for most days for at least 2 weeks. Well, we know it can go on for much longer. And a big red flag sign will be no longer enjoying things you used to. So imagine if you love skiing, working, of sport, cooking, spending time with certain loved ones. Imagine doing those things, like you're engaging in them and you're like, I don't feel anything. It can actually be quite scary and distressing, where people will say, I used to love spending time with my partner or my kids, and I just don't care anymore. I actually can't feel anything, feel numb or empty, right? That is a hallmark sign of depression. You may see tearfulness, you may not. And remember, a lot of the signs look different in different people, right? Some people may be tearful and other people may be angry, numb, empty. Some people may struggle to work and other people may actually overcompensate with work, right? There can be a mental fogginess or struggling to make decisions or struggling to concentrate. There may be, some people may be moving a bit slowly, but it may not always look like that, okay? Some people may look quite restless. Very, very often we will see disrupted sleep. And some people may oversleep, right? Where they're sleeping, 10 plus hours, exhausted, saying maybe sleep is the only thing they're looking forward to. And other people may not sleep enough, right? So they may be struggling to stay asleep through the night. You may see very commonly in teens and in men, you will see irritability. And the internal feeling can be guilt, worthlessness, hopelessness, or helplessness. And I need you to know that there are varying degrees of depression, mild, moderate, and severe, right? And we often see with more mild to moderate depression, there can be an indifference towards life. It's like, what's the point? Just whatever, like disengaged. You may even hear them say, if I didn't wake up tomorrow, like it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. And with more moderately severe to severe depression, you may actually hear suicidal thoughts or planning to end one's life. Now, anytime someone is having suicidal thoughts, especially, and if a plan is also being formulated, we consider that a mental health crisis. That person must be referred to support or to check in with a counselor, okay? So just to summarize, we all experience sadness, sadness is really healthy. Feeling sad does not lead to depression, right? We all feel it. And one pillar of great, resilient mental health is that you allow yourself to feel sad, especially if something has happened and it's sad, right? So if you're like, well, I feel sad that I still have to wear a mask, or I feel sad that it's so stressful to try and travel to get home, or maybe someone betrayed you, or you feel disappointed. Healthy sadness, right? That's typically going to last maybe 30 minutes, maybe a couple of hours, depending on what happened. If it was something a bit bigger, maybe a few days. However, when you're feeling healthy sadness, you may be slightly different. Maybe you're a bit quieter, a bit withdrawn, maybe a bit distracted, but there will still be things in your life you enjoy, right? Where you're like, okay, I'm going to watch something, or I'm going to take a walk, or I'm going to light a candle, or there will still be hopefulness alongside that sadness. And there will be no major disruptions for an extended period of time in your life, okay? And you never ever see suicidal thoughts with healthy sadness or healthy emotions, really. Depression is a serious clinical condition. It must be diagnosed by a GP or a mental health professional, right? It is biological, emotional, psychological, and you're not going to enjoy things you once used to, okay? So, you know, imagine like looking at a beautiful sunset and you're just like, I don't really care. Like, I don't feel anything, right? Not a one-off. We all have one-offs. It's most days begin feeling that way for several weeks or more. And the way you're feeling is beginning to interrupt one or several parts of your life. So it may be ability to function, relationships, personal or professional, physical health, or your work performance, right? The longer depression goes untreated, the more it can disrupt a domain or several parts of your life, okay? So it can grow. And the inner world with depression and even with anxiety disorders can be a lot of shame, unworthiness, a chronic harshness that is there towards the self, right? Sometimes I would describe depression like being in an abusive relationship with yourself, right? And the way that we speak to ourselves impacts us, our thoughts, feelings, and mood, or our behaviors the same way as if someone else said it to us, right? So if the inner voice is like, you're not good enough, you know, you should be better, faster, stronger. If that's happening inside of our mind, it impacts our mood the same way as if someone else said it to us. And with depression, that inner narrator is quite loud, right? And it's, you can imagine it's quite exhausting to navigate life with that, right? So this is depression. We're going to shift gears now, and we're going to speak about clinical anxiety. And before I mention clinical anxiety, I will just kind of broadly talk about what is anxiety. So we all experience anxiety. It is a common, healthy feeling to have. And if you have a deadline coming up or an important project and you're feeling a bit anxious, that's healthy. It's actually your mind and body saying, okay, I'm going to focus. I really care about this. This is important. You know, think of anxiety as like a little bit of salt. A little bit of salt is good. Too much, it'll just ruin it. Another metaphor I really like, or a visual, is like a little bit of pressure on a violin is really good. You can make music, right? But too much chronic pressure can actually break the strings. Okay, so some anxiety is good. And when you think of anxiety, imagine the spectrum, right? Like there can be mild, moderate, and like severe. Now, there's something in our mind that is very helpful, and it is called our amygdala. And it's this little pea-sized organ in our mind that is triggered when there's a threat. So imagine you're walking through Spinneys and it looks like someone is about to sneeze on you, or maybe you hear someone scream. I hope this doesn't happen, but maybe you do. And the mind will immediately trigger fight or flight. And what starts happening in that situation is your heart starts racing, okay? And it's pumping blood to all those major muscles that it will prepare you to fight or to run away. Your frontal lobe switches off, which is this part of the brain. It's like higher order thinking, creativity. It's actually where we access empathy, and you don't need that when it's time to fight or to run away. You're going to see your pupils are going to constrict, and any bodily system that is not needed for those two F's, fight or flight, they shut down, they become depressed or slowed down. And all of the fight or flight systems, they're ready to go. Muscles, heart is racing, and you're ready. Now, this is really helpful when there's a threat in your life, right? The body's like, let's go. And there's a surge of adrenaline and cortisol, those stress hormones. Now, humans are the only creatures that can think their way into a panic. Okay, so you can be sitting in the comfort of your home, your living room, and you can think, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. No one likes me. I'm gonna get fired. Not good enough. And our threat system can be activated, right? Where the body actually begins going into fight or flight mode. And a hallmark sign of an anxiety disorder is that the level of fear does not match the situation. So imagine you are going to meet a friend for coffee, a friend that you've known for a very long time, but you feel like you're about to miss your connecting flight. Or you're going to meet a colleague for a regular check-in, a meeting, but you feel like you're about to present to several thousand people, right? And it's not a one-off. It's most days feel that way. So someone struggling with anxiety, you may even find they wake up full of dread, where it feels like something horrible is going to happen, okay? So it is pervasive. It can be interrupting physical health. It can be interrupting relationships or your ability to function, okay? And the most severe form of anxiety is a panic attack. And this is a mental health crisis. It usually comes on quite suddenly and it feels like you're going to die, okay? So some of the signs of anxiety, and as you can imagine, they're super physical, right? Because the threat system is actually being activated. So pounding heart, chest pain, blushing, dizziness, headaches, muscles get quite tense. Very commonly digestive system, which is being depressed when we're in the threat mode. People will have IBS-like symptoms, okay? Because the body's like, evacuate, we're under threat, no time for digestion. Muscle aches and pains or restlessness. And psychologically, it can feel like your thoughts are racing, looping, like I just can't switch off, right? We can also see the thought pattern of catastrophizing, because when we're in threat mode, the body and the mind are hypervigilant. Imagine like a home alarm system that has become extra sensitive. It's like the wind goes by and the home is like, the alarm's going off. And that is because the threat system is activated, right? You're not feeling safe. So the mind can be racing or going blank, because we do see fight, flight, can also have a freeze response, okay? And if you're in threat mode, it will be really hard to concentrate because the body's like, what are you doing sitting here and focusing? Like, we need to go. We need to go or we need to fight this person, right? So hard to concentrate, irritable, indecisive, catastrophizing, jumping to that worst case scenario frequently, feeling on edge. And behaviorally, we can see this person may be fidgety, they may be micromanaging. Sometimes we will describe someone struggling with anxiety as, oh, they're controlling. And it's not that they're controlling. It may be that when they control their environment, it helps them manage their anxiety and feel in control, when inside they may be feeling quite out of control and fearful. Okay? And many people struggling with anxiety, you can see certain behaviors, whether that sometimes you can see it really confounding or co-occurring with addiction. Okay, not all the time though. Phobias are a type of anxiety disorder. Okay, so if there was a social phobia or a fear of flying or You may see that person avoiding those types of situations. Now, just to summarize, what's the difference between healthy worry versus clinical anxiety? We all have healthy worry, we all have anxiety, right? It's a healthy human emotion. Usually our healthy anxiety is triggered by something. You have a deadline or something coming up and you're like, oh, I feel anxious about this. And as soon as that kind of task or thing is done, we go back to feeling like ourselves. It's temporary. With clinical anxiety, it can be triggered by something specific, risk factors, different situations, but it doesn't have to be. It can be there for no reason at all. It's more long lasting. It's there for most days, for several weeks, if not several months. And it's beginning to interrupt your thoughts, feelings, and possibly relationships in your life. You never ever see suicidal thoughts or behaviors with healthy worry or anxiety. That is a crisis. Okay. And similar to depression, with anxiety, you can see hopelessness, helplessness, excessive shame, guilt, criticism, right? So those are very similar. And the longer depression goes untreated, we can see anxiety comes along and vice versa. Okay. I want to kind of shine a light on high functioning anxiety, but really this is also applicable to high functioning depression as well. It's really any high functioning illness. This person can be quite hard to detect, and oftentimes when they show signs, we ignore them. So this person can appear as detail-oriented, outgoing, active, super helpful, hardworking, perform under pressure, and super loyal. Okay, so I know what you're thinking. You're like, what? That's me. And that's the type of person I want on my team. And I'm here to say not everyone who is everything on the left is struggling. No, that's not what I'm here to say. What I am saying is oftentimes the person who appears this way can be fueled by overthinking, seeking approval, struggling to slow down. They'll say, when I rest, I feel so anxious. I don't know what to do with myself. While they may be super helpful, they may be struggling with boundaries to say, actually, no, I can't take on more, or I can't work through the weekend again, or they may appear quite loyal, but be struggling with setting those boundaries, okay? And procrastination is really a symptom of anxiety. I'm dreading this so much, or I want it to be so perfect, so I'm going to put it off until I have that kind of those time constraints, and then, okay, it's good enough, it's done, right? Now, oftentimes this individual will look at their performance and say they're doing great, they're strong, they don't need support, everything is great. We tend to ignore when they say, oh gosh, but I'm so exhausted, or I haven't taken time off in a long time, or that they're going through several risk factors in their life, okay? When you notice that, it's really important that you check in with them and ask them, how are you doing, right? What do you need? How can we support you? And you also do that towards yourself, that even if you are high functioning, but that a part of you is struggling in one or some part of your life, is that you are taking time to rest, recover, recuperate, and to be very protective of your emotional hygiene as well. This person is usually headed for burnout because the thread that kind of binds the right side is fear. I'm being driven by fear. We can call this, this isn't a clinical word, but we often see this as the insecure overachiever, right? Achieving great things, but driven by fear. And it's actually not so categorical. We can have projects where we're really driven by fear, and then other times we can have other projects where we are very driven by passion and excitement and our values. We're being boundary. It can really fluctuate, right? Now, if you have a team member that is performing really well, but you're like, I'm worried about them, or they haven't been resting, or anytime we give them excellent feedback, you hear them criticizing their work. I could have done that different. I could have done that better, indicating that they're quite hard on themselves. It's important that you encourage that we don't miss these people, right? It's really important. All right. You don't need to know this as a diagnostic purpose, but just know that there are a lot of similarities between depression and anxiety, but a difference is that with depression, the predominant feeling is emptiness or sadness. And with anxiety, the predominant feeling is excessive fear or worry. And you can see panic attacks with anxiety disorders. But there's a lot of shared signs as well. Okay. So mental health crises, these are all things that we must involve a mental health first aider who is, they are trained to respond to crises, or a professional. If you or anyone is having suicidal thoughts, if someone lets you know they're being harassed or bullied in some way, a panic attack, a psychotic episode, and that means losing touch with reality in some way, the severe effects of substance abuse, these are all considered mental health crises, okay? Professionals that can help will be a psychologist. Counselor is an umbrella word. Counselor can mean psychologist, counselor can mean clinical social worker, it can mean master's in marriage and family therapy, master's in counseling. So it's really more of an umbrella word. But counselors and psychologists do not prescribe medication, psychiatrists do, and a GP can as well, okay? So now a really important slide, which is, well, what do you mean take care of myself? What are the things I should be doing, okay? So one is, it's really important that when you have days, weeks, months where you are highly stressed, you must not make things worse for yourself, okay? So do no harm. That means do not engage with people who drain you. If you're like, gosh, that person's an energy vampire, I hope, I don't know, don't say that to anyone, but like, if you feel like that person just really triggers me, or it's really hard to be around them, you know, like don't go hang out with maybe your mother-in-law on a week when you're like, oh, I just don't feel well, although mine's quite nice actually. But be mindful of having those boundaries when you're not feeling well. You want to organize clutter around you, right? So having a clean, minimalistic space is also quite soothing, which is why spas can feel quite soothing, because they're quite, they really consider the lighting and clutter's not there. So think of the space around you. You also do not want to engage with the news, even shows or movies that are upsetting or triggering. You want to avoid connecting with those things. You want to be curious about, how am I speaking to myself about this? If you are being harsh, shaming, judgmental, or even neglectful to how you're feeling, it can make things worse. And if you're like, actually, I'm pretty critical all the time, and I always have been, that is a really important indicator to check in with a counselor to investigate what's going on there and how can we work through that. You want to avoid alcohol, which is a depressant, right? And you also want to avoid caffeine, which makes anxiety worse on days when we're feeling worried. So first things first, don't make things worse. Really? And you can even think about, if there's anything in your life, you're like, when I have to do that, oh my gosh, I just, even if I'm feeling okay, I don't feel good then, you know? So like, when I think of the worst place you can take me, it's going to be Carrefour and Mall of Emirates. Oh my gosh, sensory overload. But you have to think about, what is it for you when you're like, oh, when I have to do that or go there, or it just drains me. So it's really important to know that, because on weeks when you're not doing so well, we want to reduce or eliminate those things. Now, essential self-care, you know these things, but I'm just going to highlight them. You must sleep at least 7 straight hours. It is the essential fuel for your mind and body. No matter how much counseling someone even has, if you're not sleeping, it's never going to be enough, right? These are our foundational needs for mental and physical health. If you find that despite having sleep hygiene, you are still struggling, then check in with a counselor and let's investigate what's going on there, or a GP. You must eat nutrient-dense meals, and you must have at least 1 liter of water. When we are dehydrated, it deregulates our mood as well. You need to be moving at least 5,000 steps, if not 10,000, and have some type of practice of turning inward, okay? And you must have fun. That means unstructured play. This is essential for the health of our mind and our body, okay? You must give yourself permission to feel. And I'm going to like just briefly talk about this, although I could do we could do like a whole webinar on this. And this is actually a really great book by Mark Brackett called Permission to Feel. And what that means is if you are going through a high stress week or day, is you can identify what you're feeling, you can acknowledge it, give it space, and then you can regulate it. Those 3 things are actually emotional intelligence, okay? So what that practically may look like as a starting point for all of you is, 1, you must check in the same way you would sincerely check in with a team member or a loved one, and you'd say, well, what are you feeling about that? Pause. You may say, they may say, I feel sad, or I feel really worried. Okay, that's really good. You've just identified the feeling, right? Although there's way more emotions than happy, sad, and angry, okay? Although we know those are the only ones people tend to know. So I've identified it, I'm feeling worried. All right, now let's acknowledge it. Acknowledge it means let's give it space, let's validate it, let's investigate curiously. Do this for 3 minutes. You may say, where do you feel worried in your body? Okay, I feel it in my heart, I feel it in my chest. If that worry were an image, a painting, a color, a weather forecast, what would it look like? I say, I don't know, it looks like a cyclone. That's it, we've acknowledged it. We're giving it space and we're not judging it, okay? You want to, when you're feeling feelings, you need to suspend judgment. It's just observing it curiously. And then once you've identified and acknowledged what you're feeling, we want to search for soothing, not solutions. We do not solve feelings, right? We want to soothe them. So that would look like, I acknowledge I'm feeling worried. I kind of like feel it in my chest, it's here. What can I do in this hour or today that would be soothing? And soothing is synonymous for regulation. Okay, so like children actually don't have the capacity to regulate their emotions. So parents actually have to do it for them, right? But soothing can be, it will be different for each one of us. So some of you may say, I need silence. Someone else may say music. Someone may say socializing. Someone else may say, I need time alone, right? And think of 5 sensory experiences. So that may mean, what am I hearing? What is the lighting like in here? Can I light a candle? Can I take a shower? Can I go for a walk? What are the things that I can do that would be soothing? And the quickest, most cost-effective way of soothing your nervous system is a deep breath, right? So because when we're feeling worried or stressed, our nervous system is actually activated, right? So a deep belly breath, meaning in through your nose, right? You're actually soothing your nervous system. You're like, okay, body, like, calm down, I'm here. Like, that is a really important mechanism of soothing. And think of soothing as different sizes, right? So that's a small soothing mechanism, small yet high impact. You know, a bigger soothing mechanism may be, okay, I'm going to plan a trip. I'm going to take time off. That's big. We can't always do that though, right? So smaller things like water, movement, change of scenery, these are all different types of soothing. So when it comes to emotional intelligence and having great mental health, your self-knowledge or self-awareness of what soothes you is gold, right? It's very protective of your mental health. And know that each day you may need different things. So some days I may say, I just need some time alone. And another day it may be, actually, I need to socialize or connect with someone who nourishes me. So be curious about what soothes you. This is what we mean by essential emotional hygiene, Okay. This is a really great tool if you're like, I don't know where to start to feel my feelings. This is called the wheel of emotions. And you can, when you're being curious, you can kind of look through and say, okay, I said fearful, but I feel scared, feel helpless, I feel overwhelmed, I feel nervous. Okay, so you're getting more nuanced or building more emotional granularity, which is very protective of our mental health, and it builds a lot of EQ. You know, EQ is not about detecting emotions in others, it's about doing it in you. Because when you build a greater muscle to identify, acknowledge, and regulate feelings in you, you will, the ripple effect of that will be that you can be curious about it with others and detect it in others as well, empathically. All right. So I'm not going to get into too much detail about this, but one of the focuses that we have on the Lighthouse is not only building mental health literacies, which is what we just did right now. It's also focusing on, once I've identified the signs that I or a team member is struggling, what do you do then? How do you actually respond? So we do offer a mental health first aid training. It is evidence-based. It's in 27 different countries worldwide, and we focus on identifying the signs of depression, anxiety, addiction, and crises like suicidal thoughts, panic attacks, the after effects of trauma. How do you respond? What should you do? What should you not? What do you say? How do you say it? How do you approach? And that's something that we offer every month at the Lighthouse. And we also offer bespoke trainings for corporate organizations, schools, hospitals, and so on. So you can just contact us if you're interested. I leave you with a quote I really love, which is, when health is absent, wisdom cannot reveal itself, art cannot manifest, strength cannot fight, wealth becomes useless, and intelligence cannot be applied. And I hope if there's anything, I hope there's many things you've taken from today, but really that your mind matters. If you are not considering your mind, your emotional health, your inner world, then I hope you begin that journey today or deepen it for those of you who are already there. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Have a lovely rest of your day and your week. We will be emailing the recording and a handout with key takeaways. Thank you, everyone. Bye.